Hi guys, welcome to Miss McNair's audio version of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I urge you all to annotate along while I read. To save my voice, I will read it straight through, but if you were to annotate, here's a good example for you. All right, here's my little annotation code. Ooh, oh gosh. All right, there's the code. So you see here I have blue for foreshadow, pink for important stuff, maybe something I think I might be tested on, or a big plot twist. Purple for themes such as human justice, or in other words, all the crazy unjust things happening to innocent people, alienation versus love, and happiness. And with those last two, I mean to look at when these instances occur and see if you can figure out what the author means by sharing it in such a way. Last, we have symbol in green, and of course we all know that in looking for symbols, we search for an expression of ideas and qualities represented by what is often an object and contains deeper, more significant meanings. Okay, so now I will start reading. If you would like to catch up with me on chapter 12 of our version of the book, you are welcome to read on your own or check out Spark Notes. But because they are Spark Notes, they have a different version of the book. So while we are on chapter 12, on Spark Notes, you would read up to chapter 19. All right, so here we go, back into the 1800s, or also referred to as the 19th century, in case we were still confused. France, to find out if Dantes will ever get his hands on that treasure. And what will happen if he does? What will happen? What will happen? All right. Okay, so we are on page 72 on chapter 12. Now that the treasure which had for so long been the object of Faria's meditations could assure the future happiness of the young man he truly loved as a son, its value had doubled in his eyes. Every day he spoke of the immensity of the treasure, explaining to Dantes all the good a man could do for his friends in our modern times with such a fortune. At those moments, Dante's face would darken, for he remembered the oath of vengeance he had sworn, and he thought of how much harm a man could do to his enemies in our modern times with such a fortune. Faria did not know if the Isle of Monte Cristo, but Dantes did. He had often passed by that small island, located 25 miles from Pianosa, between Corsica and the Isle of Elba, and once he had landed there. It was, and still is, completely deserted. It is a rock of almost conical form, which seems to have been thrust up from the bottom of the sea by some volcanic cataclysm. As Faria had predicted, his arm and leg remained paralyzed, and he lost almost all hope of ever reaching the treasure himself. But he continued to dream of an escape for his young companion. For fear the letter might be lost, he made Dantes learn it by heart, word for word. Then one night, Dantes awoke suddenly with the impression that someone had called him. He opened his eyes and tried to penetrate the darkness. His name, or rather a plaintive voice trying to articulate his name, reached his ears. He leaped out of bed and listened. No doubt of it. The voice was coming from Faria's cell. Good God, murmured Dantes. Could it be that? He shoved back his bed, rushed into the underground passage, and was soon at the opposite end of it. The flagstone was raised. By the flickering light of the lamp we have already described, he saw the old man. His face deathly white and contracted by the horrible symptoms which Dantes already knew, and which had filled him with such terror the first time he saw them. Well, my friend, said Faria resignedly, you understand, don't you? There's no need for me to explain anything to you. Think only of yourself from now on, of making your captivity bearable and your escape possible. You'll no longer have a half-dead body tied to you, paralyzing all your movements. God is doing something good for you at last, and it's high time for me to die. Dantes could do nothing except clasp his hands and cry out, Oh, my friend, my friend. Then, regaining a little of his courage, he said, I saved you once, and I'll save you again. He lifted the foot of the bed and took out the small bottle, which was still 1/3 full of the red liquid. "There's no hope," said Faria, shaking his head. "But you may try if you wish. I'm growing cold. I feel the blood rushing to my brain, and that horrible trembling is beginning to shake my whole body. In 5 minutes, the attack will begin in earnest. In a quarter of an hour, there will be nothing left of me but a corpse." "Oh," cried Dantes, his heart breaking. "Do as you did before. Only this time, don't wait so long. After you've poured 12 drops down my throat, if you see that I'm not regaining consciousness, pour the rest. Now carry me to my bed. I can't stand up any longer." Dantes picked up the old man and laid him on his bed. "And now, my friend," said Faria, "sole consolation of my wretched life, you whom heaven gave me a little late, but gave me nonetheless, at this moment, when I am about to be separated from you forever, I wish you all the happiness and all the prosperity that you deserve. My son, I bless you." Dantes dropped to his knees, leaning his head against the bed. A violent shock interrupted the old man. "Farewell, farewell," he murmured, pressing Dantes' hand convulsively. The attack was terrible. Twisted limbs, swollen eyelids, bloody foam, a motionless body. This was all that remained of the intelligent being who had been there only a moment before. When he believed it to be the right time, Dantes pried Faria's teeth apart with the knife and poured 12 drops of the liquid into his mouth. He waited for 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour, half an hour. There was no sign of a movement. Trembling, his forehead streaming with cold sweat, he decided the time had come to try his last resource. He poured the rest of the liquid into Faria's mouth. The medicine produced a galvanic effect. The old man shook violently in every limb. His eyes opened, frightening to behold, and he heaved a sigh which sounded like a shriek. Then his trembling body gradually became rigid again. Finally, the last murmur of his heart ceased. His face grew livid, and the light faded entirely from his eyes, which remained open. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. The first feeble rays of dawn invaded the cell, casting weird reflections over the face of the corpse and giving it an appearance of life from time to time. As long as the struggle between day and night lasted, Dantes was still able to doubt. But as soon as day won out, he realized fully that he was alone with a corpse. An overwhelming terror seized him. He no longer dared press that hand hanging over the edge of the bed, nor look at those vacant, staring eyes, which he had vainly tried several times to close, but which had always opened again. He blew out the lamp, hid it carefully, and fled from the cell, replacing the stone behind him as well as he could. He left none too soon, for the jailer was coming. This time he began his visit with Dante's cell. Nothing indicated that he was aware of what had happened. He went out, burning with impatience to know what would happen in the cell of his unfortunate friend. Dantes crawled back into the underground passage in time to hear the jailer calling for an aide. Other jailers soon arrived. Then came the heavy, measured footsteps of soldiers. Behind them came the governor. Dantes heard the bed creaking as they tried to rouse the dead man. The governor ordered them to throw water in his face. Then, seeing that this had no effect, he sent for the doctor. The governor left the cell, and several words of compassion, mingled with crude jokes and laughter, reached Dantes' ears. "Well," said one voice, "the old lunatic's gone off to find his treasure. Bon voyage." "With all his millions, he still didn't have enough to pay for his shroud," said another. "Oh, the shrouds of the Chateau d'If don't cost much. Since he's a priest, maybe they'll go to a little extra expense for him." "That's right. He'll have the honor of the sack." Dantes listened without losing a word, but he did not understand much of what was being said. Soon the voices died away, and it seemed to him that everyone had left the cell. He was nevertheless afraid to go back in. A jailer might have been left behind to guard the dead man. After an hour or so of silence was broken by a faint noise, which gradually grew louder. It was the governor coming back, followed by the doctor and several officials. There was a moment of silence. The doctor was evidently examining the body. He declared the prisoner dead and diagnosed the cause of death. "Not that I doubt your competence, doctor," said the governor, "but we can't be satisfied with a mere examination in such cases. I just ask you to carry out the formalities prescribed by law." "Very well, then," said the doctor. "Heat up the irons." This order made Dante shudder. He heard hurried footsteps and the sound of a door being opened. Several moments later, a jailer came back into the cell. Then the thick, nauseating odor of burning flesh penetrated the wall behind which Dantes was listening in horror. Beads of sweat burst out on his forehead, and for a moment he thought he was going to faint. "You see, he's really dead," said the doctor. "That burn on the heel is decisive. The poor madman is cured of his madness and delivered from his captivity." Dantes heard a sound like the rustling of cloth. The bed creaked. There were heavy footsteps, like those of a man lifting a burden, and the bed creaked once again under the weight which had been placed back on it. "Will there be a mass?" asked one of the officials. "Impossible," replied the governor. "The chaplain asked me for a week's leave yesterday, and he's already gone. If the poor priest hadn't been in such a hurry, he'd have his requiem." "That's all right," remarked the doctor, with the impiety common to those of his profession. "God won't give the devil the pleasure of receiving a priest." There was a burst of laughter. Meanwhile, the body had been laid out. "Tonight," said the governor. "What time?" asked one of the jailers. "At around 10 or 11 o'clock, as usual." "Shall we watch over the body?" "What for? Just lock the door as though he were still alive." The footsteps went away, and the voices died down. Then a silence more mournful than that of solitude, the silence of death, invaded everything and chilled the depths of Dante's heart. He slowly raised the stone with his head and cast a swift glance around the cell. It was empty. He entered. Stretched out on the bed, faintly illuminated by the pale ray of daylight coming in through the window, he saw a sack of coarse cloth under whose ample folds he could discern the outlines of a long, stiff form. It was Faria's shroud, that shroud which, according to the jailers, cost so little. It was all over. Dantes was separated forever from his old friend. Faria, his helpful, kind companion, now existed only in his memory. He sat down on the edge of the frightful bed, plunged in deep and bitter melancholy. Alone. He was alone again. The idea of suicide, which his friend's presence had driven away, now rose up again like a phantom beside his corpse. "If only I could die," he said. "I'd go where he's gone, and I'd be with him again. But how can I die?" He thought for a moment, then said, smiling, "It's very easy. I'll stay here and attack the first man who comes in. I'll strangle him, and they'll guillotine me." But then he recoiled from the idea of such an infamous death, and swiftly passed from despair to a burning thirst for life and freedom. "Die? Oh no," he cried out. "What would be the point of having lived and suffered so much if I were going to die now? No, I want to live, to fight on to the end. I want to win back the happiness that was taken away from me. I must punish my enemies before I die, and I may also have some friends to reward. But they'll forget me here. And the only way I'll ever leave this dungeon is like Faria." As he spoke these words, he sat stock still, staring into space like a man suddenly struck by a terrifying idea. Then he stood up, put his hand to his forehead as though he were dizzy, and murmured, "You sent me this thought? Was it you, O God? Since only the dead leave here, I'll take the place of a corpse." Without giving himself time to reconsider his desperate resolution, he leaned over the hideous sack, slit it open with the knife which Faria had made, took out the corpse, carried it into his own cell, put it on his bed, wrapped around its head the rag which he himself always wore, pulled his blanket over it, kissed the cold forehead one last time, tried once again to close the rebellious eyes which persisted in remaining open, and turned the head to the wall so that when the jailer brought in his evening meal, he would think he was already asleep, as he often was. Then he went back into Faria's cell, took out the needle and thread, and threw off his clothes so that the jailers could